Hey everyone, how's it going? This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I am Anthony Cosenza, and we are happy to have you join us really for the second time on Wednesday for some of you. So appreciate those of you who tuned in earlier. We'll talk about that in just a second. But I am joined. We've got the trio. I'm stoked. We got the trio for the entire show, at least I hope, God willing. Scott Schulte is here, and he is wearing an intimidating-looking Bengals shirt, getting prepped for the he's got the tiger eyes right there. It looks like kind of the wall, some of the walls at Paul Brown Stadium there. How are you? Are you psyched? The Bengals suit up Thursday night, first preseason game. New look team, obviously, but you got to be kind of psyched, right?
Assuming I can watch it, yeah. But yeah, I mean, obviously it's nice to get it back. But unfortunately, you know, they put the games on very obscure channels, so it's at least where I live. So it's kind of hard to. I don't always get to watch the preseason games based on the over-the-air channels they put on. But that being said, yeah, it is. It's hard to believe that I was on vacation last week, so I missed the last show, and I was on the way back. I realized, oh wow, yeah, that's coming up this week. That's really soon. So, and you mentioned the shirt. I should mention. Polyester, maybe whatever the material is that makes it really hot. It's not a great summer shirt.
It's like wearing a garbage bag type of material, just not breathable at all.
Yeah, it'd be very good for the winter. Which, I mean, they play when it's cold, so it makes sense. But yeah, I definitely would not wear this if I wasn't inside.
It's a cool looking shirt. I do like it. It is a cool looking shirt, and also wearing a unique shirt. I think I saw on your Twitter account, John. You got a nice little present from, I don't know who it was. Was it Bengals Talk? Is that who it was, or what?
Good old Nate from BengalsTalk.com gave me a little care package because I tweeted out that I saw Joe Goodberry at Bengals training camp wearing it. So shout out to Nate. He's a good dude.
Nice, yeah. And if you aren't joining us live, it's kind of a cool logo, I guess. It's like an X-ray of the Bengal brain. And if you follow our good friend Joe Goodberry, he's got his Twitter avatar, I guess, is very similar to that. So good to have you both with us. We got a lot to talk about. We're going to talk about the Bengals. The first depth chart was released. We'll talk a little bit about Brandon LaFell being released as well. That'll tie into the depth chart conversation, I think. And then we'll talk about the preseason game against the Bears coming up Thursday night, what we want to see, players to watch, things like that. And we'll listener question. I don't know if you know, since you were on vacation, but we did institute a new hotline, Insider Bengals hotline that people can call in now. So we have that capability, and we'll give that number out later in the show. So if you do want to call, if you are so inclined to leave a question in our live YouTube chat, as always, would welcome that, as well as in the comment thread on cincyjungle.com, a variety of other ways, on Twitter at BengalsOBI, the Orange and Black Insider at gmail.com is the email address as well. And we've got to promote, always do. It's on SoundCloud, YouTube, iTunes, cincyjungle.com, and a variety of different platforms. So check it out. You might notice this episode is going to be a little different because, and I will look different because I will be wearing two different outfits. Because earlier in the day, I had the playing Hall of Fame tackle Anthony Munoz, and as I was saying, as we were gearing up for the program, I'm really bummed that we couldn't make the schedule work to have John and Scott join in on that. But Anthony joined me via phone and was able to minutes. Now that interview is available on YouTube, and then we'll get it on the other platforms and all of that. So check it out. It's about 20 minutes worth of really good stuff from Anthony Munoz, and really enjoyed speaking with him. Awesome guy, as you would expect. And many Bengals fans have met him, and great dude. So that's already available on YouTube. And then what we're going to do for those of you who are tuning in live, we're going to add that into the overall podcast episode. So check that out. It'll be kind of separate and with the show, so you can get it a number of different ways. But great stuff from him. And guys, let's kind of kick it off here. Some of the stuff that Anthony and I talked about. It's always weird saying Anthony and I, given my name. But some of the stuff that we talked about was about the depth chart, and that was recently released. And there were some surprises. I guess the first surprise before the release of that, it was the release of Brandon LaFell. So, Scott, your thoughts? We kept saying, we've been saying forever, and I can't tell you how many listener questions we had. When's Brandon LaFell going to get? When's he going to get rid of him this year? And I was vehement that they were not going to get rid of him, and they did. Scott, were you surprised by the move, and is it the right move?
I was very surprised because on Cincy Jungle, we do a little write-up on the players. We kind of preview each player on the roster leading up to the final cutdown day. And one of the guys I wrote about was Brandon LaFell. And at the end of the article, we give like, what are the percentage, odds of him making the roster? I forget what I gave him, but it was 3 days before he got cut. So it was right before I went on vacation and he got cut. And when I came back, I saw, oh my. Anyway, I think I had him like 85% or something, or 80%. And the reason was there's just no, you look at the roster, there's not a lot of depth. I mean, John Ross had 0 catches, 1 fumble last year. Boyd, hasn't been used very much. And outside of that, you have guys like, Kermit Whitfield and, rookie Alden Tate. Cody Kors played very low. There's just not a lot of depth as far as veteran players. And we all know Marvin Lewis loves his veterans. He never cuts his veterans. They keep their veterans. They, no matter how well or poor they do, they keep them. And then he does the exact opposite and cuts Brandon LaFell. So I was very surprised, basically for that reason, because that's just it's a non-Marvin Lewis move to cut a veteran, especially when you don't have a lot of veteran depth at that position. But as a Bengals fan, and I think sometimes we kind of undervalued who Brandon LaFell was. I mean, he obviously wasn't a superstar, but he's always been a solid number 2, number 3 kind of guy on every team he's been on. He's someone that, you can count on. He can do the things you want him to do. He can, play over the middle. He can play different positions, different roles on your, run different routes. He's a solid, decent, he's a Bengals kind of guy, a solid, decent guy. He'll block. He'll do what you want him to do. And to see him get cut was a surprise, but it's also, I think for a Bengals fan, you have to be very excited. Not excited he got cut, but I think the reason you should be excited is because what does that tell us? And I think what it tells us is that John Ross and Tyler Boyd are looking a heck of a lot better this year in camp, and the coaches are confident enough in those two being the number 2 and the number 3 that makes them feel that they can get rid of the only other player with a lot of experience at that position. So it's very exciting in that regard because, hey, if you're cutting this guy, that tells me that Marvin Lewis, who loves your veterans, you are that convinced that Ross and Boyd are your guys, and you're even starting Ross in that, preseason scrimmage as your number 1 opposite AJ Green. And then, of course, all the reports from camp are starts dropping passes left and right. But it's still encouraging to see that. So, yeah, I'd say it's to me, it's a good thing. Not for LaFell, but don't want him to get cut, but because it tells you the young guys, Auden Tate's coming back, and that they see enough promise and development with the young guys that the move makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's the main takeaway, at least for me, is that Marvin, a guy who has been so attached to his veterans, and granted, Marvin has done. There is the frustrating issue of him really hanging on to veterans longer, maybe longer than they should, or giving them more prominent roles than they should have. But he really has done, I guess, the one thing that you got to like about this veteran preference type of thing. He relies on some of these guys for a handful of years when the team is in major transition. And usually, more often than not, it has worked out for the Bengals in terms of these guys producing. Now, Brandon LaFell, like you mentioned, Scott, his numbers were a little inflated in 2016 because of an injury to AJ Green. He wasn't overall explosive in terms of a big game-breaking receiver, but he had some solid games for the Bengals. He was a good bridge guy, which is what they needed. And unfortunately, I think he gets a little bit of a bad reputation because who we replaced was the exciting Marvin Jones and the flexible Mohamed Sanu. The team is still kind of scrambling to do that. I like what you said about, the young guys. You got to, obviously they're making plays and opening the eyes of the coaches at camp. John, I mean, same question to you about it. If it's a good move for the Bengals, and I guess the other side of it is, some of the receivers seem to be, especially like AJ Green. They made some comments about maybe not being so happy that LaFell was let go. Is that a negative, or is that just, hey, we're sticking up for our friend, and he gave us some good games, and you got to take it for what it is?
Yeah, I think every time that there's a move like this where the fan base is excited at the prospect of young guys coming in and supplanting a veteran who may have overstayed his welcome, there's always that dynamic where on the player's side, he was someone that a lot of young guys looked up to, obviously, and was a leader in that locker room. He's older than AJ Green. Even AJ Green learned a few things from him just about being a pro and all that kind of stuff when he was still progressing through his prime. So there's always that kind of dynamic, and the fans shouldn't be, feel guilty about, being excited about this. But at the same time, there's that perspective where, this was a guy who, essentially lost his job, and now he's looking for another one. But it's just piggybacking off Scott's point, not only was it a non-Marvin Lewis move to move on from Brandon LaFell, it was a non-Mike Brown move, because LaFell had a $1 million roster bonus that he earned, I think, at June 1st. And so now when he's cut, he's accounting for 40% of the Bengals' dead money that they're incurring. 40% of dead money, and you're talking about the receiver that played the most snaps over the past 2 years and accounted for well over 1,000 yards. This is, it's a logical move, but it's still surprising just looking at all the factors about what this team usually does. And I think for veterans that kind of overstay their welcome, it's more of the guys that are drafted and developed by the Bengals, more so than guys who may be coming on to their second or third contracts. And maybe that was another reason why, LaFell had a shorter leash than he did. But he definitely doesn't get released if Boyd and Ross don't do the things that they're supposed to do and make the leaps into years 3 and 2 respectively. I think they're going to be fine as long as they stay healthy. These guys are obviously talented. They were drafted high for a reason, and they are the components needed to advance the offense in a way that Brandon LaFell simply couldn't have.
Yeah, and essentially, it almost seems that the Bengals will probably, just based on previous history and stuff, they'll probably keep about 6 wide receivers on the final roster. And if everybody makes it through healthy, it would seem that Green, Ross, Boyd, Josh Malone, and then you've got kind of a scrum for those final 2 spots between Cody, who continues to impress, and Alex Erickson. So it does kind of clear up the waters a little bit in terms of clearing space for that position to see what the Bengals end up doing. As it stands, you kind of have Green and Boyd as the quote-unquote starters, with Ross as the number 3 guy. But I think the way they move those guys around and what you can do with Ross, obviously Ross will probably be, Ross and Boyd will probably be 2A, 2B in the receiving group. Obviously different skill sets, all that stuff. And then you've got Eifert, who's going to be commanding a lot of passes as well. So interesting makeup in terms of the depth chart to the wide receiver group. Moving on to the running back group, pretty expected. You got Mixon, you got Bernard, and then you got Walton, but there's still a scrum at the end for that possible 4th spot. I think it would seem that maybe a guy like Trey Carson probably has maybe the inside track, but I mean, someone's got to have to play special teams, right, John? I mean, I think. Do you see them keeping even 4, or what do you think? How do you think that plays out?
4 is probably the number, just looking off historical precedent under Lewis. And that special teams guy, I would think, is Mark Walton because of what he did in Miami. And that was one of the main things that we talked about on the show about, why they were so enamored with Walton as a prospect. And Walton was listed as 3rd on the depth chart, I believe. And I think that was the first lie that I saw on the depth chart, because that depth chart is basically useless in terms of practicality. Walton is mainly taking 4th, 5th, 6th, or at least 4th and 5th reps at running back behind both Trey Carson and Boone Williams. And Walton was listed as 3rd in front of both of those guys. So I think he could get 3rd snaps in the preseason game, and that practice work means nothing, I guess. But at the same time, I think it's a much more tighter race for that final spot. There's Brian Hill, who was here last year, who actually looked pretty good Obviously, Carson has been here for 3 years. Boom has been here for 2. And Quentin Flowers is that wild card because he's done nothing but impress in practice. He's been taking reps as kick returner, and I think that obviously gives him an advantage of potentially going for a spot. He's only going to make it a running back. He's not going to make it a quarterback, obviously. So I think 4 is the number, and they have 8 right now. So it would be hard for me to see them cutting 5 of those guys because there is a decent amount of talent behind Mixon and Bernard. But I think obviously Walton, and it'll probably either come down to a 3-way competition between Hill, Carson, and Flowers, and one of those guys will probably end up being on the practice squad.
Yeah, interesting note about Walton there about, where he's in on the rotation for the snaps, and that's a good insight you give us from training camp there. I think maybe that's also, the Bengals are probably being cautious. I think Walton has had the ankle injury and had, I think, surgery, right? Kind of this spring or winter. So, obviously that hindered his workout times and all of that. We've talked about that, but maybe they're being a little cautious. I mean, obviously that position gets banged up pretty easily. So maybe they're doing that. But, I mean, I there's no way that I don't see Walton obviously making the final roster if he's healthy and able. But interesting note there by you for letting us know about where Walton is in the pecking order in terms of carries and touches. And, that also, aside from maybe giving him a little bit of a breather, that also may be because, like you said, there's a log jam behind him. They need to see what those guys have to make sure that they keep the 4 best guys on the roster if that's the way they're going to go. Scott, we have a new, in terms of at least the first depth chart release, there is a new starting right tackle, and that is Bobby Hart. Anthony Munoz and I talked about that a little bit in our interview earlier, and he and I kind of both said, well, I'm not totally surprised that the Bengals like Bobby Hart. They kind of got after him early this offseason. He was one of their first acquisitions in quote-unquote free agency. But, I mean, he's beating out, at least according to the depth chart, it looked like a boy he's behind him. And then Jake Fisher is the backup left tackle, not really mentioned too much in the right tackle. Obviously, he'll be in that mix. But, Scott, are you surprised about Bobby Hart being the top guy at right tackle? And are you convinced to this point that he is the best option of those 3?
I'm going to say, surprised, yes and no. I think in one way you kind of have to be surprised just looking at the whole NFL. Here's a guy who Pro Football Focus, we like to mention because it's an easy number to refer to, gave him like a 44.8 last year, which was good enough for 78th among all tackles in the NFL. There's 32 teams, 2 tackles, 64 tackles roughly starting. Some teams rotate guys in and out. So say 60, 70 tackles. You finish 74th. That's not very good. So anyone outside that top 60 or 70 really shouldn't be starting because they're just not very good. So, as a guy that the Giants kind of complained about lack of effort. They seemed to cut him as soon as they could right after the season. They didn't want him returning as bad as their line was. So obviously a lot of people around the league don't think he's that good. So in that, from that perspective, yes, it's a surprise that he is the starting tackle. On the other hand, it kind of makes a lot of sense because part of it is you have to look at who is he competing against. It's not like he's competing against Willie Anderson, or Andre Smith in his prime. He's competing against Jake Fisher, who's coming back from an injury, who had struggled before he had the heart condition, the dysrhythmia. He's competing against Kent Perkins, who's an undrafted free agent, who I think played guard in college mostly. So he's kind of transitioned to tackle. He was a great story last year, but there's a difference between year to year when you get his undrafted guys. How good is he going to be? And possibly a Boyhe, although they have a Boyhe kind of listed on the left side. So it's not like he's competing against the greatest of talent. And so I think on one hand, and this is where I think that we're really going to see in the game is I think it's kind of a scary, and I don't want to say that because we like to think the line's better. We kind of fixed a couple of the positions, hopefully. But yeah, unless there's something, unless Frank Pollock was able to work some sort of magic with this guy, and I suppose we'll find out, but all reports I've heard from training camp are that Sam Hubbard's been beating him pretty easily. So, and nothing against Sam Hubbard, but he's not Von Miller by any means. So you kind of, I don't know. It's I think it's more just a statement of where the other guys are, which I think is a little discouraging, because I think we were kind of hoping that, hey, after the surgery, that with Fisher, now Boyhe's in his fourth year, he has this supposedly great offensive line coach. One of these guys is going to turn it on, and instead it's Bobby Hart. But maybe Bobby Hart's turned it on, and I guess it's just more. I'm kind of rambling, so I'll stop. But essentially, yeah, it's more a state of what they have behind him as opposed to, I think, anything he's actually doing himself.
Well, I'm going to say this, that in talking with Anthony Munoz, he is dead convinced that the assistant coaches are going to make a big difference and are making a big difference this year. I asked him about that, and he mentioned Frank Pollock a lot, and he believes that he's going to have a big impact. John, I do want to make those of you who do not follow John on Twitter, you should. He's been at training camp and he's been posting some videos. And some of what you've posted, at least from a couple of maybe Monday, Sam Hubbard was beating or getting pressure against Trey Hopkins, who is listed as the starting right guard. I think you also said Carlos Dunlap giving Bobby Hart fits was another video you had. I mean, are you surprised? I guess where I'm going is, are you surprised at Hopkins and Hart being atop the depth chart? And if this kind of stuff continues in practice, meaning them kind of getting beat on, I don't know if it's a semi-regular basis or what have you, might the Bengals go and try and get someone who gets cut from another team to try and be a stopgap starter this year?
I wouldn't put that out of the equation, but I would say it's unlikely. And I would also say that in the past 3 training camps that I've gone down to, the consistent theme is, and even going way back, I've been to a lot of training camps when I was really young. The thing with practices is that defensive lines typically have the advantage over offensive lines because it's a lot of one-on-one situations. It's obviously not in game. It really favors the defensive line and a lot of those other factors. But just from the things that I've seen, Hubbard has really made an impact at anywhere he's lined up. I think one of the things we looked for when he was drafted is he going to be playing inside? Is he going to take that role away from Michael Johnson? And he finally got his chance on this past Monday, and he looked really good there. So hopefully we see more of that tomorrow. During the later course of the game when Johnson's out. With Hart and Hopkins, I'm not surprised that Hopkins is starting just because of the way he finished last year. And obviously Westerman had the food illness. He lost 10 pounds, and they were kind of bringing him along slowly. So he was obviously behind Hopkins and Redmond. And then it was just a matter of Hopkins being better than Redmond, who, to his credit, Redmond has slimmed down, I think, and is looking a little bit leaner, which I think will help him in terms of pass protection as long as he has the same pop and run blocking. But it's just a matter of Hopkins being slightly more consistent. He's obviously older. The Bengals know what they have in him. And with Hart, Scott is basically right. It's more of a sense of, what Hart's competition has been like, more than just a lack of indictment, I guess, on Hart's skill set and how he's looked. Hart himself, I didn't know this. He's actually listed at 316. I've always known him to play around 330 pounds, and that has not worked for him as an athlete. He was a guard coming out of Florida State, and it tested 330 pounds. It tested as one of the worst guards at the combine that year. So he's playing at a much lighter weight than what I thought he was, and he looks slightly more athletic. I know Marvin Lewis called him athletic, and I wouldn't exactly call him that relative to other tackles, but he's looked okay, and that's more than what I could have said about Fisher or Boyhe, who have had much worse reps than Hart. And I think what we talked about with Pollock about getting Fisher and Boyhe, right, utilizing their talent. It's just that Fisher was the guy who had more tools to work with than a Boyhe, but Fisher still has to execute regardless of what Pollock is working on with him. And Fisher is kind of just not clicked. And I wonder if that's more to just his development stunting because of injuries, and then playing him at tackle and fullback instead of tackle in his first couple years. And I wonder if that stunning growth has really affected him in year 4. And with Boyhe, it's just a matter of, this guy wasn't as good as we really thought he was, and there's only so much that another offensive line coach can do for him.
Yeah, the Bengals aren't. They've done some things in the Marvin Lewis era. They've made some moves, be it trades, player trades, be it getting a guy that's a waiver wire addition after final cuts. Reggie Nelson was a late trade, if you remember. Brandon Tate was an addition they made in 2011 after he was kind of surprisingly cut by the Patriots at that point. You can go back to Kelly Jennings being a summertime acquisition. So, they've gone after some guys. Now, I'm not sitting here saying, oh boy, they can't go out there with Hopkins and Hart. I don't know. Those guys better show a lot this preseason in terms of being able to, for fans and the team to trust them. But that's kind of some of the major spots of the depth chart we wanted to talk about. Some surprises, some not. I think obviously the offensive line is going to continue to be a focus this offseason, this preseason, especially right guard and right tackle with Hart and Hopkins leading the way at this point. Now, as we like to rely on preseason game performances to do that, and the Bengals have their first one coming up against the Bears this Thursday night. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza, and I'm joined by John Sheeran and Scott Schultz. We all are associates, and I'm glad they were able to join us tonight as we get ready to preview the Bengals' first preseason game. You can get this program on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, at cincyjungle.com, as well as get in touch with the program at BengalsOBI on Twitter and the OB Insider at gmail.com. We're going to be taking some listener questions if we have some time. If you want to call in, not quite yet. We're gonna talk about the preseason game first. But if you want to call in a little bit after that, 949-542-6241 is the number, and I'll give it out again before we actually do take listener questions. This usual number 949-542-6241. Give us a few minutes to talk about the preseason game first, if you are going to call in, and then we'll get to your questions. And if you don't want to call in, that's cool. You can text the line. We receive text messages, or you can leave your questions in the Cincy Jungle comment section, or you can leave them in the live YouTube chat as well. So, guys, let's talk about the first preseason game.
I'm doing a podcast right now.
The first preseason game is coming up, and the Bengals are facing off against the Bears. Now, if you remember last time the Bengals faced the Bears at the end of the 2017 season, it was not so pretty. They got blown out. They got blown out by a rookie quarterback and Mitchell Trubisky, who had a career day, of course, against the Bengals. And, they trounced them. Now, obviously, we're not going to see a lot of the same starters, at least not for a long period of time. But we'll get to see them a little bit, and we'll get to see a lot of these guys we've been talking about for a long time. We'll start with you. What are some of the main takeaways you want to see from the Bengals in preseason game one? I mean, I said this earlier today. It's not going to be pretty. These first games never are pretty. But Anthony Munoz said what he would like to see is, the mental aspect at least being grasped, not stupid mistakes, all that kind of stuff. Obviously, fatigue and other stuff is going to be present. But what are some of the takeaways that you were looking for, or that you are looking for as the Bengals take the field?
I mean, there's, I think, obviously a million, but if I had to limit it to, a handful, I think there's a million questions on offensive line. So that's, I guess, 2 million. So that'd be 1 million of them. But, yeah, the starters might be in for a series, so I don't think we're really going to see anything with the starters. So I'm kind of focused more on the backups. And if I had to pick one, I think the one that I'm most interested in, at least right now, of the many, is the backup quarterback situation, which I think is probably going to be between Jeff Driscoll and Matt Barkley. I mean, with Matt Barkley, you kind of know who you have. He's his numbers, his performance has been a mediocre veteran, kind of bounced around. He's a guy you kind of hope you don't have to rely on as your backup. But then your other option is Jeff Driscoll. He's a guy that is more athletic. He kind of has the build of a franchise quarterback. He can run. He has a big arm. All the things you want. He's a little older for a guy who's never really taken an NFL snap. He spent a lot of time in college when he was at Florida, and then left Florida, went to Louisiana Tech, and then he's been in the NFL. And they've seen they've obviously seen something in him. They've kept him on the active roster, for a little while. And this is kind of his year. Okay, we've kind of done, everything you can really do with all the time in college, all the time in the NFL. Here's your time to show at the very least you can be our number 2 quarterback. And so to me, that's the really exciting battle of many would be, can he fend off Matt Barkley? It's not like we're asking him to fend off, Andrew Luck or, Tom Brady. We're just, can you, outplay Matt Barkley and get that number 2 spot? And, it's one of those positions you hope you never have to turn to. I mean, obviously you hope Andy Dalton plays all 16 games, which he pretty much has most of his career. I mean, obviously it was the 2015 when he got hurt at the end of the season. And then I think in his first season, he might have missed the very end of the opening game against the Browns, but pretty much he's played every single snap. But if it comes to that, you don't really have a lot of confidence if Matt Barkley is the guy. So you kind of hope that Jeff Driscoll has turned into something. So that's, I think, the one thing because I figured both those guys are going to get a lot of playing time. You figure one will probably play most of the first half, one will play most of the second half. They might throw Woodside in at the very end. He's probably more destined for the practice squad, if anything, this year. So I think that's probably my number 1 battle that I'm looking forward to tomorrow.
Okay. So and agreed. And we'll expand on this topic towards the end of the show here, because we did get a listener question in the live YouTube chat that talks about the backup quarterback situation, which is by most reports, and John can maybe corroborate, it has not been very good in terms of the guys playing behind Andy Dalton. John, obviously, I mean, it's so cliche. Oh, we don't want injuries. Of course, you don't want injuries. You don't want major injuries, especially to very important players, starting players, that sort of thing. I remember a couple of years ago, remember the Bengals, they brought in a guard from the Panthers. He was set to start for him, and I think in his first preseason, Wharton, yeah. Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Travell Wharton. Yeah. He blew out his knee like in the first or second preseason game, and it's like, oh, there goes your starting left guard. So obviously, of course, we all want to see minimal injuries, minimal scary long-term injuries. We don't want that, obviously. But what are 1 or 2 kind of things that you're looking at and that you hope to take away in a positive light from the Bengals as they face the Bears?
So the last year when they played the Bears, they got trounced, obviously, and the biggest part of that was that they could not stop the run. And the Bears possess a killer interior offensive line and 2 really good running backs, Jordan Howard and Tariq Cohen. Obviously, those guys aren't going to play, outside of 1 or 2 series. So that first series, if they're going to run the ball, I want to see Andrew Billings, who's going to start a nose tackle, hold his own because he had an up-and-down game against the Bears last year. I want to see Preston Brown attack gaps like Kevin Minter and Hardy Nickerson couldn't do against the Bears last year. I want to see a force to be reckoned with up the middle in run defense, and just because that was such a colossal weakness on the team last year, and it was the worst part of the defense was the middle of that defense. So the Bears only got better in that area with drafting James Daniels, who will probably play a little bit center, maybe a little bit left guard tomorrow. So that unit has gotten better. Hopefully, I think the Bengals have gotten better there because Billings has improved and Preston Brown is now here, who's going to be more healthy than Minter, and I think he's a slight upgrade. So that first drive, I want to see the Bengals stop the run on defense because I know that their secondary is competent. I know they have 3 good pass rushers. We don't know if the run defense has actually gotten better, and this will be a good first test for them for that first couple drives. And obviously the young guys are going to play most of the game. I'm looking at the receivers. Obviously, I'm looking at Erickson, holding his own because he is probably going to make the roster as that backup slot receiver. He's going to be the main guy returning kicks at the moment. I want to see him work well with Driscoll and Barkley. And looking at the backup quarterback play, the backup quarterbacks, they're like Moneyball and for the Oakland A's. Like that whole strategy was, can this guy get on base, right? And with backup quarterbacks, it's can they move the ball? You know, they don't have to do anything flashy or anything, but they just have to, you know, manage the pocket, avoid sacks, and just keep the ball moving. And whoever can do that between Barkley and Driscoll is most likely going to win that job. Last year, it was Driscoll who was, you know, fabulous in the preseason. He had that one juke move against Tampa Bay. And everything that we've seen from Barkley is that he cannot move the ball and he can't complete passes. So whoever can operate the most in the structure of that bland offense that they roll out is going to take that job. And we're going to find out really soon, week 1.
Yeah, I guess what I'll be looking at, of course, is the offensive line, the protection holding up, and not just the starters, no matter how little or long they play, but the guys behind them, because we mentioned Fisher, Boyhe, guys like that are fighting for jobs, fighting for potential starting roles. We've got a young Billy Price in there, so it sounds obvious. There's a lot to watch there. Sounds like my audio was a little staticky. Is it better?
Much better.
So we'll cut that piece out. Okay. What I was saying is that the offensive line is what I will be watching. It sounds like, there's a number of different players that are going to be, Boyhe, Fisher. Those guys are still fighting for a potential starting role, definitely backup roles. You've got young Billy Price who's in there, who's going to be, who's he may get a little more time than other guys on the line just because he's young and kind of getting used to the system. So I'm looking for that, but I'm also looking for the just kind of the offense to kind of what you both have said with the backup quarterbacks, move the ball, get points on the board. The last few preseasons when Dalton's in there, they're not moving the ball very well. Part of that has to do with the offensive line not holding up. They're not moving the ball well. They're not putting points up. I get it's preseason, but I kind of want to be greedy because this offense has been so vanilla and so bland the past 2 seasons that I want to see them do some things in terms of getting into the end zone, scoring some points, and doing that. I do agree, though, that the run defense and the backup quarterback battle that you guys both mentioned are very critical. And John, I believe it was Michael Myers who agrees with you in the YouTube chat, saying we would like to see how we hold up against the Bears running backs. That run defense last year for the Bengals was atrocious. In that game, they were especially atrocious. So obviously I'll be looking at that. I guess the guys that I will be, and I'm going to ask you guys next, but the specific players I'm going to be watching the most. I'll go with Matt Barkley because he's currently the backup quarterback, and he's probably going to get some extensive work, I would think. I'll keep my eye on John Ross. He probably won't play too much, but just kind of see what he looks like against some NFL talent, I guess, because we didn't really see much of it at all last year, preseason or otherwise. But I'm also going to keep my eye on Jesse Bates, and Jesse Bates was a guy that he kind of came in and he's been touted as this turnover machine. They spent a 2nd-round pick on him. They're trying to find ways to get the 3 safeties on the field. And for some reason, and maybe it's just me, I have not heard much about him at all in training camp in terms of making a bunch of plays, creating those turnovers. And so I'm really interested to see what he will look like in the Bengals' new defense under Terrell Austin. John, give me maybe two or 3 players that you are looking at that you'll be specifically watching in this first preseason game.
The 5th-round cornerbacks in Devontae Harris and Darius Phillips, they have primarily been on that 2nd or 3rd team with K'Vari Russell at cornerback. Phillips has mainly been in the slot. Harris has mainly been on the outside with Russell on the other side. I don't know if Anthony Miller, the Bears receiver, is going to start tomorrow. He might be with the 2nd team, but that could be a matchup between Harris and Miller or Phillips and Miller that I'm really interested to see because Miller has had a great camp with Chicago. He's a great route runner, and how just any cornerback handles him is going to be really fun to watch just because he's a fun player. So, and just going off of what you said about Bates, the whole rest of the secondary, because they typically keep 9 or 10. We know who the 5 stars are going to be, but we don't really know who those 4 other guys are going to be. Like, it could be Brandon Wilson, could be still Josh Shaw, it could be the undrafted Trayvon Henderson. So just watching these young guys in the secondary fight for those jobs, specifically with Harris and Phillips, because maybe only one of those guys makes the roster. Just seeing how those guys do now when the lights are on is going to be really fun to watch.
Yeah, and kind of just real quick, kind of going back a little bit to the depth chart discussion. Were you surprised to see Shaw listed as a safety? Guy at both of those, at both cornerback and safety. He's kind of been, he's an athletic guy, but I just, for some reason, it hasn't fully clicked in terms of finding a true niche in the NFL. And were you surprised to see him listed as a safety?
Kinda, but not really, because he played mostly safety last year. But it doesn't do him much good, because besides Shaw, the safeties are stacked, and there's going to be at least 4 guys who are locked for the roster besides Shaw. So if he were to make it as a safety, they would have to carry 5. But obviously, he has that versatility of being both a safety and coming up and being a nickel cornerback. But even if he's that, then he's probably the second or third guy behind Dennard and Darius Phillips, and you have to challenge him. So Shaw is definitely, in my opinion, on the outside looking in. And I think he has a worse chance of making the roster right now at safety than he would be at cornerback, because they are dealing with a couple injuries at cornerback with Tony McRae and Sojourn Sheldon. And they brought in a guy in CJ Goodwin, but I don't think they're going to expect much of him. So it's kind of interesting how they're officially listing him at safety, even though he's played exclusively safety in training camp. I'm surprised they just haven't moved him back to cornerback with all those injuries that have occurred there.
Yeah, the Goodwin signing is very interesting, because that guy was like a wide receiver. He's gigantic. I think he's like 6'4". Very, very limited defensive snaps in college or the pros. But obviously the athleticism is there, and I think the Bengals like that. So, I mean, he's got a major hill to climb up, but interesting dude to say the least. Scott, give me 2 to 3 guys specifically that you'll be looking at this. And we've got a 4th host. I love it. Some guys that you're looking at as the Bengals take the field for the first game this year.
Okay, and this, if I apologize in advance if this is repeat of some of the stuff John said. So I was a little distracted, but I think a couple of the guys. One is Andrew Billings, just because this is his third year, and I was surprised to see him listed as a starter over Baker. So I'm really curious to see what he does. I mean, he showed last year, he had some good moments where he got some push, he got in the backfield, but he didn't seem to have that awareness. Like, he would get back there and then the guy would still run past him. So I'd like to see him, take that next step and use that strength and that, that power he has to get past those guys and really turn it into something. So he's the guy I'm looking at. Another one's kind of 2, I guess, is the Sam Hubbard, Carl Lawson, our younger edge rushers. And I would say Willis, but I really haven't heard much from him so far in the preseason. Hubbard, because at Ohio State, he was one of these guys, he was decent, but he didn't seem like, and he was no Joey Bosa. He was a guy you watch, he's an effort guy. He was good against the run. He could get, pressure now and then. But everything you hear from camp, it's like, and it could be the tackles he's going against too. It's like, wow, like this guy seems, sounds like he's pretty decent. So I want to see him go against another line and see, is he as good as we've seen? And then same with Carl Lawson. Now he's in year 2. I want to be able to see how they use him. Let's see that last year wasn't a fluke. Let's see that he's getting pressure this year. Let's see, do they line him up actually on the edge? Are they going to use him a little more? Are they going to keep him in this like outside linebacker role they said he was last year? Where exactly are they going to play him? And then the other one I'm kind of curious about, and well, actually it's 2. I would say Billy Price, but I've already said 1 Buckeye, so I'm going to go with a different guy. I'm going to go with Drake Kirkpatrick. Just because he's had 1 decent year as far as I can recall, and that was the year he signed the big contract. Last year, he was clearly well behind William Jackson in his performance, probably well behind Darqueze Dennard. I know Dennard's more like the slot guy, but I want to see are you guys still there?
Yeah.
Okay, we had some buttons pushed accident. Okay, there we go.
Okay.
There we go. So anyway, for those of you who don't have video, I just had to move the mouse to the ear. Well, okay. Sorry. What was I saying? Yeah. Okay. Drake Kirkpatrick, because he just has not seemed to play very well. He had a couple big plays a couple years ago, but outside of that, he just doesn't look like the guy you want. He has the length, he has the speed, but he just seems to get burnt on a regular basis. And I just want to see, do we have a number 2? It's obviously not Shaw because they put him at safety. Dennard I'd like to see if they would give him a chance, or if they have someone else, sitting there that they think can be that number 2. And I assume it's going to be Kirkpatrick all year, but if it is, I'm sure hoping he shows more than we've seen so far.
Yeah, I think Dre Kirkpatrick's been kind of boy of late, and somewhat rightfully so from the fans. But I don't think we're going to see a lot of those guys for very much time, unfortunately. This game, I think that's more the dress rehearsal third game deal. But yeah, I mean, especially with William Jackson now being touted as the Bengals' best corner and all that kind of stuff, it is going to be interesting to see how Dre Kirkpatrick, I guess, rebounds or whatever. And if you didn't know something about my co-host, guys, it is that they can multitask with a lot of different stuff in their respective homes. So kudos to you both, because you've had some distractions and you guys have still brought it. I love it. I love it. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. I'm Anthony Cosenza, and I'm joined by John Sheeran and Scott Schultze. Appreciate them jumping on. We're going to take a couple of listener questions here and get out of here. You can call or text us if you want to do that. 949-542-6241. We'll be taking calls here for the next couple. If you want to do that, totally cool. We did get some questions, or a question, in the live YouTube chat, so we'll get there. Or you can tweet us at BengalsOBI to have your question be read on the air. Again, this program is available via SoundCloud, YouTube, iTunes, on CincyJungle.com. And get the program. Subscribe to our channels. Appreciate it. Let's go with Kenneth McClendon Jr. And John and I talked about Kenneth. Scott, I don't know if you heard, Kenneth's father is Skip McClendon, the old Bengal who played for the team in the late 80s and early 90s and whatnot. So
yeah, he was on their Super Tecmo Bowl lineup.
Yeah, and so we're gonna and thank you, Kenneth. He did shoot me some information on how to reach out to his dad, and we're gonna try and get his dad on the show as well. So that was really cool. But he's also an ardent listener of the program, and we're stoked on that. He wants to talk about the backup quarterback position a little bit more. He says, let's say Andy goes down. Are we confident in any of the backups? And is there anyone out there that we can bring in instead of what the Bengals currently have? Scott, I guess I'll kick it off with you on thoughts about Kenneth's question there.
I'll start with the second part. Is there anyone they can bring in? I think there definitely is one name who's been thrown around a little bit, is Teddy Bridgewater. Because the Jets have 3 quarterbacks. They signed him before they drafted your boy from USC, Darnold. So they have Darnold. They have escapes me on the second guy.
McCown.
They still have Josh McCown. So Bridgewater's the third guy. He's never really been. I mean, he had one decent year in Minnesota. I mean, he's not like some sort of great, savior, but he is a solid, decent, he's definitely a step up over what they have right now behind Dalton. And some people, if you remember when Bridgewater was in the draft, when he fell to the Vikings at the end of the first round, a lot of Bengals fans were clamoring for them to grab this guy to replace Dalton or be the future replacement for Dalton. Obviously, that didn't happen, but he's someone they could definitely bring in. He'd be a huge step up. There's obviously some other guys out there. He would probably be the biggest name. He may be the cheapest. I don't know if the Jets would want to carry 3 quarterbacks, depending what their roster has. You mentioned earlier the Bengals doing trades around cut down day. That would be a possible trade if there's something the Jets want, like a deep, a backup in their position, or whatever, late conditional pick or something, depending on playing time. So that would be the second question. The first part of the question: are we confident in any of the backups as of right now? I wouldn't say it's no. I would say it's a very strong no. Or even a little stronger than no.
Like a hell no.
Yes. maybe even that's squared. It's beyond a purgatory no. Definitely to a hell no. And because with Barkley, you can look at the numbers. You can go back and see the film. He's just not. And I know Anthony's a USC guy, and I'm going to be, so I won't be too mean. Yeah, he's just not a great option. With Jeff Driscoll, I think he is he's kind of the guy that you are putting. He's kind of your lottery ticket in a sense. I mean, you've invested a lot in him. You keep putting those, dollar bills to that cashier at the Speedway gas station. Keep getting your scratch offs. We've been doing that with this guy for several years now. We've put all that money. I'm hoping this is the year we're going to scratch off, and either we're going to get a bunch of lemons or we're going to get whatever you get on a scratch off, and you win your $10,000. So that's kind of what he is. He's that kind of scratch off lottery ticket guy that I think we've put enough money in that we're either going to get something from him or we're not. I think we're going to find out this preseason, and I'm kind of hoping we do. But as long as they've had him, unless he's this 1 in a million Kurt Warner kind of guy that just takes a long time to develop into something great, he's probably not. Which means that if Dalton goes down and they don't get a Bridgewater or something, they could be in for a long season.
Yeah, and I don't know if we need to even go to John because he astutely said hell no. So
I just want to say one thing. Teddy Bridgewater.
I'm kidding, of course.
If Teddy Bridgewater does not get hurt in 2016, he's still the Vikings starting quarterback, and he does just as good, if not better, than what both Sam Bradford and Case Keenum did up there, because Bridgewater was operating a very, very difficult offense in Minnesota before 2016, when I forget, it might have been, it wasn't North Turner. I think North Turner left. It was Pat Shurmur. Pat Shurmur came in and made Bradford and Case Keenum look like gods up there. And, then they got Diggs and Thielen going. Bridgewater would have been so good in Minnesota if that injury didn't occur. He's still, I think, he's still at the level that he was in 2015. Obviously, there's a lot of confidence that needs to come with his knee. But if he's made available, the Bengals need to get on that immediately. Because looking at just people don't have a lot of confidence in Andy Dalton carrying this offense. Then you look at Matt Barkley and Jeff Driscoll. That's going from a B to like a C- or D+. So there's just no reason. I wasn't the biggest AJ McCarron fan, but even AJ McCarron can be considerably better than either Barkley or Driscoll. So there's just no confidence in those guys doing anything more than just the very, very, very bare minimum of running an NFL offense.
Yeah, and I agree with you guys. I don't have confidence really in either guy. Let really show more in the preseason, and even then, I still don't know if I would be overly confident. I do think that Barkley here and now probably has more surrounding talent than he has had in some, if not all, of his previous NFL years. So, I mean, that could help, but how much, I don't know. So, yeah, and I think in terms of getting another quarterback, I think that probably will only happen unless the Bengals are in dire straits in terms of an injury to Dalton or whatever, and they need to strike a trade to do something like that. And so yeah, I don't know if that's gonna happen here. Real quick, John, on a 1 to 10 point system, this is from Alex Gonzalez in our chat room. 10 being very confident. How confident do you feel about the O line this year, especially so far right now? Scale of 1 to 10.
So last year I was at a 3. This year I'll give it a 5.5 to 6, because the one thing that I don't think a lot of people not understand, but they just don't know, is that an offensive line is not good by the good pieces that's on there. It's only as good as your worst player. And that was the biggest reason why they gave up 40 sacks when they had both Andrew Woodworth and Kevin Zeitler, 2 very, very good players on a team that also, on an offensive line that had Cedric Boye and Russell Bodine playing significant snaps. So you upgraded 2 spots, presumably, but you still have 2 big question marks at those 2 positions. And if at least one of them is very bad, which right tackle could be very bad, it'll disrupt a lot of things. And the performances of the other 4 guys, it could just be wiped out because one guy is constantly getting beat. It might not be that way. That's like a worst case scenario, but that's why just upgrading those 2, left tackle and center, doesn't move the 2 up all the way to like an 8 or 9. It's more of like a 5 or 6. I think it's a good indication of where the offensive line is right now. It's kind of in that average area when you compare it to the rest of the league, which is obviously better than it was, but it's not as better as maybe people thought it will be.
We had a call. We'll try and see if we can get that caller back there. Scott, if you are there, your scale of 1 to 10 on the Bengals offensive line, both overall outlook this year and where you sit right now.
I guess where I sit right now is in the kitchen, but as far as your first question, if the 2015
Scott, if you could hold that thought real quick. I apologize.
Okay.
We're getting a call here, and I want to get this person on the air here.
Andrew Tyler.
To accept, press 1. To send a voicemail, press 2.
Hi, who's this?
Hello?
Hi, who's this?
Hey, my name's Andrew Tyler.
Oh, Andrew, how you doing?
Good, how are you? This is great, man.
Yeah, we've got a number out now, so we're kind of official. And I know you've been in our live chat, and John, I forgot to tell you, Andrew, Andrew did your great work earlier, but
Yeah, I've been following his active stuff.
yeah.
Sports or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, what question do you have for us tonight, Andrew?
So I don't know if you guys have answered this before, but I just want to know if you guys think that that Dalton will succeed more, and not just Dalton, just the whole offense will succeed more in Bill Lazor's new offense, or if it would have been a better idea just to have Bill Lazor kind of re-implement the same offense that he implements the offenses that Dalton's been used to in the past, kind of what he did last year. Or do you think it's a better idea that he just started over?
All right. Well, we're going to take your question. We'll get you off the air here, Andrew. But thanks for the support for the show. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks for the call. You can call in every episode if you want, and we'll try and get you on the air. All right. Thanks, buddy. Appreciate it.
See ya.
So, John, were you able to hear Andrew's question there?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a good one too.
Yep. Go for it.
So what he was alluding to is that why doesn't Lazor just do the same things that Hugh did in 2015 when everything was great? And it's a good idea in theory, and it's exactly what Ken Zampese tried to do back in 2016, 2017. And two reasons why that didn't work is that A, the personnel wasn't the same because they lost Marvin Jones, Mohamed Sanu, and Brandon LaFell and Tyler Boyd just weren't ready to implement those roles effectively. Obviously, Eifert was hurt both of those years as well, and Eifert was completely healthy in 2015. So you couldn't exactly replicate the same offense when the personnel wasn't there. But also, the offense worked under Hugh because Hugh was calling the plays, and it was under his direction. And, another offensive coordinator can look at that playbook and try to replicate it, but if it's not from the primary source, it might not always work. And that's why, offensive coordinators and play callers, they kind of have decently large egos, and they're like, yeah, maybe I'll do this my way. And, if it's going to succeed, it's going to be because it's my concepts, it's my playbook and all that stuff. And I think Zampese tried to put his own spin on a couple of things. And obviously he just showed he wasn't competent as a play caller, even if he tried to replicate what Hugh did. And I think it's good that Lazor is using his own concepts and using his own spin on things, because I want whatever is confident of both Dalton and the play caller. And if Lazor has talked with Dalton about how the direction of this offense and the adjustments that he's going to make, I'm confident in it because Lazor obviously knows Dalton. He's been with him for a couple of years, and he has experience as a play caller, unlike Zampese. So I'm confident with him bringing in a new system, a Chip Kelly disciple. Lazor is. He's doing a lot of things that the traditional Air Coil is doing, and I think that really fits Dalton in the same ways that it did under Hugh. But I just like, I like the new direction. I don't like. I would prefer it this way because I've seen another offensive coordinator try to replicate what Hugh did, and it just wasn't the same because it wasn't Hugh calling the plays, I guess.
Yeah, and it seems as if Lazor kind of has at least a little bit of a grasp on who he wants in his offense, and who they brought back, who they added, all that kind of stuff in terms of players and personnel. Scott, I think you're with us. I know you got a lot going on there, but I don't know if you heard the question from Andrew. Your thoughts on that, but I do want you to expand as well on. I do want you to expand on your thoughts on the offensive line, your confidence level in it, if you could. Did we lose Scott? We might have lost Scott, so we'll get back to him. But we have a call again.
To accept, press 1. To send a voice.
Hi, who's this? Okay, they hung up. They got too impatient. Oh well. Hey, that's what happens with the phones. It happens. We'll get you next time. Whoever that was that just called in, we'll get you next show. But I don't know if we have Scott back, but we'll close the show. I lied again. We've got it. We've got a call. So no, we don't. Jeez, Louise, this person keeps calling and they keep hanging up. Yeah, no prank calls.
You think this is free?
I know. Seriously, come on. This is the real deal here, guys. We'll get out of here. Any final thoughts, John, as the Bengals are heading into training camp? All right, heading into their first preseason game, rather.
No, I'm just ready for football to start. It's been a long off season. It always is. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to stop talking.
Gotcha.
Ready to start watching.
All right. I believe we have somebody.
To accept, press 1.
Hi, who's this?
Yeah, this Terrell.
Terrell, how you doing?
How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. How you doing?
First of all, I just want to say great to see everybody.
Yeah, we had the troublesome trio back tonight, so that was good.
Yeah. But, real quick, I know y'all guys got to go, but I just had like a Bengals / NFL question.
Okay.
And basically, I watch NFL Live and NFL Network, and everybody keeps talking about DeAndre Hopkins and Antonio Brown and Odell Beckham. And I truly believe that AJ is better than Odell. And most of I think Julio was overhyped, so I think I got him ahead of him. But even though I hate that guys, but I gotta say Antonio is number 1. So I got Antonio number 1, AJ number 2, then Julio, then Odell, number 5, then Hopkins.
That's not an unfair take there. I do think that there are some, between AJ Green, maybe, he doesn't have the Matt Ryan or the Eli Manning or, however, I mean, and people can place Andy Dalton where they want in terms of quarterback pecking order, but AJ Green may have had a little bit of a slighter bump in statistics in comparison to some of those people. If he had a Big Ben, if he had some of those guys thrown to him, I do think that, unfortunately for AJ as well, he plays in a smaller to mid-market type of atmosphere, so he doesn't get the attention that Odell Beckham gets. Unfortunately, the team has not been as successful as the Pittsburgh Steelers, especially, winning postseason games and all that stuff when Antonio Brown's been there. So I think a case is to be made there. I do think another name that a lot of people overlook, again, because of quarterback issues, is DeAndre Hopkins. John, any thoughts for Terrell before we get him off the air here and close up shop?
So Hopkins and AJ are the two best receivers that have to deal with inconsistent quarterback play. And not only that, but AJ is in an offense that's unlike Antonio and Julio in Pittsburgh and Atlanta. They don't find creative ways to get him the ball like those two get, and that's why they end up with well over 100 receptions a year and much more like yards after catch and stuff like that. And consistently, AJ is below in terms of guys with over 100 targets, but below in deep target efficiency because his quarterback is just less accurate going down the field compared to Matt Ryan, Ben Roethlisberger, and that stuff. And I've always felt not bad, but there's definitely a sense of both Hopkins and Green being underrated, where production just doesn't tell enough about their true talent because their surroundings aren't as favorable as the top two in Julio and Antonio. And I still think Julio and Antonio are 1 and 2 because they're that talented, but they're also 1 and 2 because of their surroundings and their supporting cast.
Yep, good take. Thanks, Terrell. Thanks for calling in. Sorry we had to squeeze you in. All right, you as well. Appreciate it. We're going to close up the phone lines now for the rest of the evening and get out of here. John mentioned that he's just ready for some actual football, and I think we all are. And I think we're ready to see a different Bengals team that we've seen over the past couple of years. I don't know if we have Scott back. Scott, are you there? Okay, I don't think we have Scott anymore, but that's okay. We are going to get out of here. We're excited for the Bengals' first preseason game tomorrow night, Thursday night against the Bears. It sounds like, I think one of our callers, I think it was Andrew Seiler, who said he's going to be at the game. So that's kind of cool. There's going to be some people there that are affiliated with this show. We appreciate all the callers and those of you who tuned in live. I also appreciate those who tuned in live earlier today for the interview with Anthony Munoz, and obviously our greatest gratitude to Mr. Munoz. And in that interview, aside from obviously his breakdown of the Bengals, he talks about his foundation and other community work he's doing. If you are so inclined, whether you want to donate or if you want to get involved, you can go to his websites. He had all that stuff on the interview, so check that stuff out and try and get involved and help him out. He's doing some great stuff. To my co-hosts John and Scott, appreciate it. I know we started a little earlier than usual tonight. I appreciate it. Thanks for being flexible as always. Thanks for coming on.
No problem. Looking forward to the rest of the season.
Absolutely appreciate it, guys. And we're going to get out of here. Enjoy the first preseason game of 2018, and we'll be back to talk about it and the next game as well. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. Thanks.